there are a lot of things that go into client relationship way more than what they're paying you.
Yeah.
We have a comment on Facebook, and Michael says the strength to fire a client where the fit isn't right is a cathartic experience, and it's good for both parties.
Michael, so true. So true. And this is what's funny, because I have a coaching practice, and a lot of my clients, this is one of the hardest things I have to help them work through. Firing clients. Yeah. And it is always, I won't say it's always come easy to me, because I follow the energy a lot. So if I feel like somebody's draining me, I try to sever that relationship in a kind way. But you're right, Michael. It's just one of those things where if you can't do that, you're kind of stuck. You know, it's you got to be able to get past the tough guys.
Well, and that Michael's point is a great segue to something else in the book, that you talk about, is following your gut. Mm-hmm. Because Isaac and I were discussing this, and I'm like, every business relationship that ended, I could have pointed to signs that said it probably wasn't a client that we should have taken on in the first place. And there aren't many of those.
Right.
And then, again, COVID, right, has also forced a lot of us to lower the bar a little bit and possibly take on some clients that maybe we wouldn't have taken on.
Did it though? Or did people just use that as an excuse?
Okay, well, let's dive into that then. Tell me more.
Well, and I understand last year a lot of people, my business went down significantly from a revenue standpoint.
Yes, okay.
But that doesn't mean that you have to take bad business to get the revenue back up. Maybe you just look at something different. Maybe you get creative about how you prospect or how do you find new clients. Maybe you launch a new revenue stream, which I saw a ton of people do last year. I mean, we did that ourselves. That's why we pushed up the timeline of the book, is just to be able to put something new out there content-wise. Just because business is slow or whatever, it doesn't mean you got to default back to taking cruddy clients. If you do that, you're just back to square one. You've kicked the can down the road.
Yeah. Okay. So what are some signs that we can look for that either say, yes, we're headed in the right direction with this, or abort?
Yeah. Well, I think the first one is gut. And we don't follow that in business or personally, honestly, as much as we should. So if your gut is telling you something is wrong about a person, that's a big red flag. And typically, like you said, you get all these red flags. We just ignore them.
Yep.
So if you're going to ignore them yourself, you've got to make sure somebody else knows that they're the red flags out there too, and talking it through with either, a mentor, a coach, a business partner, something like that. So somebody knows that it's not just you. Because frequently, I'll have people come to me and say, I think this person's being unreasonable. If they're not being unreasonable, I'll tell them, I'm like, I think you're overreacting. But sometimes it just takes that second set of eyes to go, you know what, they're not your person.
Yeah.
They're not a good client.
Yeah. Okay, so what do you think on the philosophy of being able to replace a client before you fire them? So what does that look like in the sense of, you're like, okay, I've got this much, this size book of business, but this particular client is really kind of driving me nutso. Do you recommend letting them go right then and there? Is there a process to maybe, that's gonna really hit, the purse pocket,
the bottom line,
if I let them go?
Well, there's a couple components. First and foremost, it depends on the stage of the business. I think when most people are in startup stage, they're pretty much taking anybody just because they're trying to keep the lights on. Yeah. Which is another reason why when you get into startup stage and when you start growing, you do need to start sucking some money away in your own little safe place. Yeah, so if you need to fire a client, if you need to hire somebody new, if you need to, kind of retract or expand, either one, you've got revenues to be able to do that. But it can't be your decision on whether or not a client is good. While it is financial, that can't be the main thing you're looking at, because your productivity, if you've got a client who's driving you nuts, it's decreasing your productivity. You don't really want to go out and start prospecting or trying to find new clients or new business because you're just worn out. Mm-hmm. So you've got to figure out there's a lot more to it than just the revenue. Yeah. So if it's affecting you where you're not making good decisions, you're not, some days it just drains you. Yeah. You go home and you're like, I'm done. That has a much bigger ripple effect than people realize. Yeah. So I think you fire them soon as you realize they're not. As soon as you realize they're not a fit. And there are a couple things. You've got to figure out, is it because they're not a fit for the work you do, or are they not a fit because they're not respecting and treating you good as a business relationship?
Michael comes up with another comment where he says, this is where AI and technology will never be able to reach. You can program intuition, never fear humans.
Yep. I think, I know that's true. AI is becoming so popular, but I'm such a gut feel type of person. I think that's an excellent point. Is algorithms are great, but the algorithms can tell me this is a perfect prospect for me, but if there's just something in my gut, and I don't want to sound all, because I'm not woo woo, I don't want to sound all woo woo with it, but if you're working with somebody they're not a fit, why prolong it?
Yeah.
On either way. And I would expect clients to do the same thing, where if and usually it's mutual, usually you can feel it's not a fit.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting because I almost feel too like letting go of a client or making a type of pivot in your business where you're attracting certain clients and you're moving away from others, especially as you grow, because again, that's something else you figure out, right? Like as you grow, you change what you're willing to put up with and what you're not. And you can also tell the activities that attract that particular client that you weren't versus like, well, if I do this, it actually kind of attracts the ones that I'm not so interested in working with. It almost feels like moving or changing banks. Like it's you in your mind, it's like it's just easier to keep them.
Yep.
It's just easier, right?
Yep.
It's going to have a far more negative impact in the long run, but our future, nearsighted brains say it's easy to just stay here. Where something that we've been talking about at Liger as a leadership team is we've been putting it in the perspective of, well, if you did this thing now, where would you be in 90 days? If you did it right now, look 90 days, where would you be?
Right.